Sorry for the brief pause while I pull that up, but for the life of me, I can't figure out how to do it any other way. This is my discussion on Johnson's Chapter 8. The title of the chapter is Ethics, Rights, and Values Without the Heat. The chapter is divided into four main sections: ethics and ethical communities, rights, values, and taking the heat out of the arguments. So in the chapter, Johnson discusses ethics and ethical communities. Ethics are the antecedent responses or behaviors and reinforcers or punishments established by our community that tell us how to behave. In short, ethics are what we call the behaviors for a community and how the members behave towards one another. Ethical communities are groups of people that share participation in contingencies that reinforce or punish certain behavioral patterns. Examples of ethical communities are families, religions, and the community in which we live. Or for us, our classroom communities is an ethical community. So we have our discussion boards. We're a community within our class, and we have a set of ethics that govern how we behave towards each other in our discussion boards. They were established by the professor, and obviously, I'm sure if one of us was to be incredibly rude, there would be some sort of punishment. We receive reinforcement with people giving positive responses to our posts. Ethical behaviors deal with the behaviors of a community and how that community influences each other's behaviors, according to Johnson. The contingencies within that community are what create the values. So the contingencies are rules saying what is acceptable behavior and what's not. The standards don't only involve behaviors with a direct impact, but also those that have an indirect effect. So this can be emotional impacts or environmental impacts. For emotional impacts, we're not directly affected by the missing children that we see that pop up on social media, or if we see something about violent child abuse, or let's take, for example, the one that if you're in Virginia, everyone has probably seen the poor dog in Richmond that got tied up and set on fire. It had an emotional impact on us. It didn't directly touch us, but we still responded to it. Environmental impacts are pollution or anything within the environment that can have some sort of aversive effect on us or some sort of an impact. Johnson goes on to discuss rights as verbal behaviors. So he states that rights are verbal behaviors that are used as statements in our everyday life about the attainment of reinforcement or the avoidance of punishment. So stating that we have a right to something is our way of saying we're able to obtain a reinforcer and that others may only interfere with that goal with our express consent. Rights are often demands of how the speaker tells us about their access to reinforce or avoid a punishment. My main example, I'm raising two teenagers. So my son feels he has a right to privacy. I feel that I have a right to check his phone without his express consent. So rights may function as tax about the environments. For example, noise ordinances. I live near a concert venue, and we have noise ordinances that set up that all concerts have to be done by 11 o'clock. The people that live near it feel that they have a right to be able to go to bed by 11, and the people that are at the concert feel like they have the right to listen to the music as long as they want to. Which leads us to Johnson's idea that just because a statement of rights is made does not necessarily mean that it's more valid or important than another express rights. Any one right can most often be matched by another statement of rights to the opposite opinion. See the example above about my son and his cell phone. Where do rights come from? Well, they come from our ethical communities, according to Johnson. Ethical communities that we are part of define our rights. Our rights statements and those of the other individuals involved in the same ethical communities are truly defined by that community and its definition of our rights. For example, in our ethical community of the United States, our governing body has established that members of our community can practice free speech. Other ethical communities around the world or in other countries view free speech as a direct conflict with their community's interests. Our histories with ethical communities lead us to the outcomes that are reinforcing or punishing. Our ethical communities also give us support for our rights. So my son is a part of two ethical communities. He's a part of my family community and his community of friends. His ethical community of friends support his right to privacy with his cell phone, and he receives reinforcement from the other members of his friends when he says, I can't believe my mom checked my cell phone, and they talk about how ridiculous I am together. But his ethical community of his family supports that his phone can be checked at any time, and by following the established conditions of texting and other things, he's going to avoid punishment. His history with both communities allows him to know his rights. He knows that he's going to get the reinforcement from his friends, and he's going to know how to avoid the punishment from me by following the rules and his rights to his phone. Values is the next section that Johnson discusses within this chapter. Values are how we describe behaviors in certain circumstances and preferred social reinforcement contingencies. Values are not physical entities, and this is where Johnson really tries to get us to describe values in terms of behavioral responses as opposed to emotional responses. So he wants us to describe behaviors in environmental circumstances and describe desired behaviors and desired reinforcement contingencies. The overlap of rights and values. Well, both rights and values refer to morally acceptable behaviors. Both refer to long-standing preferred ways of behaving, and both are verbal behaviors associated with reinforcing circumstances. Both originate with ethical communities. For example, I don't know if any of you watch The Walking Dead, but we do. So the varying ethical communities on The Walking Dead have created their own sets of values and rights. The one that's the main one that's been there since the beginning feels that they have a right to live, and so does everybody else. They all feel like after this zombie apocalypse, they have a right to live. Some have maintained the values of the pre-zombie world as far as where killing and criminal actions are still wrong and it should only be done in certain circumstances, while others no longer see that the random killing of humans is a violation of their ethical community values. It's totally changed. Johnson goes on to discuss our values beyond science. Well, it's stated in the chapter that they're not beyond science if we approach values as a verbal behavior rather than a concrete truth. To quote it, it says, just because we believe something is true does not mean it is, no matter how widely that belief may be shared in the culture. Let's take something that's fairly extreme, for example, such as female circumcision. Just because some societies believe that that is something that should be done doesn't necessarily mean that it's true or that that value is appropriate across the board. Johnson goes on to talk about that if we change the way we ask questions about values from how individuals within a community are expected to behave based on the values of that community into questions about how specific behaviors are impacted under a specific set of circumstances. Also, we can approach them from a scientific value if we make a change in how we discuss rights and values from an emotion to an investigation of the behavior that can take out the charge that is experienced in the discussions surrounding values, rights, and beliefs. So Johnson says that we can take the heat out of the arguments by approaching values or rights conversation in behavioral terms. It can take the emotional responses out of the conversations if we approach them in this way. First, Johnson states that participants need to agree that values are learned verbal behaviors. So you have to have that as a beginning or you're really not going to go anywhere. The next step is to center the conversation around how the verbal behavior was learned. So in the book, it's discussed learning that we all learn how to talk in a certain way and that repertoire is built upon as we age. The third thing is to figure out your own agenda in such discussion. So before you go into the conversation, you need to know what you're trying to get out of it. The fourth statement is no matter how you feel about the topic of discussion, you need to check it for methodological soundness. So no matter what your opinion is or what your value is, you need to make sure that the way you're approaching it follows methods. And finally, let the discussion not be about who is right or wrong, but about the evidence that might be useful in resolving the issue. So this could be used for hot topics such as burning a flag or abortion or any sort of topic that brings along with it a value associated with it. Johnson argues that while this hasn't been done widely, it would be a way for us to approach some of these really hot topic, value charged discussions within ethical communities to find a resolution, or to possibly at least open the dialogue from a behavioral set of terms and take the emotions out of it and to take the arguing out of it. My discussion question is to think of two ethical communities that you're a part of. Are there any conflicts within these communities? And can you think of one topic that you could bring the groups together to discuss in Johnson's suggested format? So I am a part of two definite communities. I'm a part of my church community, and I am a part of my BCBA community. Obviously, even given some of the discussions within the chapters, there's kind of direct conflicts between the church community and the BCBA community. I think it would be interesting to bring my church together with my BCBA group to discuss kind of the foundation of religion and how we came about our religious beliefs and whether or not those behaviors were influenced. I can directly look at myself and say that obviously my religious beliefs were influenced on the behaviors that occurred when I was a little girl. We went to church every Sunday. I got reinforcement and was, given candy by people at my church or gum, or received gifts when I went through certain criteria that matched what my ethical church community had set up for me. So I'm interested in hearing what other people have as experiences, and thanks so much.